Hello and welcome to a rather special edition of Lokad TV. Today we're live here in Paris to celebrate our 100th edition, where we're going to be looking back at the Lokad journey so far and answering your supply chain questions. So Johannes, I don't know how you've managed to kind of put up with me for quite so long. When we first kind of started out this channel, did you ever think we'd make it to 100 episodes on something as bizarre as supply chain?
No, I really didn't. I mean, literally, I just, the reason why we started all of that was just because I discovered this nice, cool software called OBS. And apparently I started to play with it. I found that it was a great piece of software, so I wanted to try it. But in reality, I think we are using it for the first day today. So, because it's only used for live. So no, I wasn't really planning that much ahead.
Okay, and here we are. So today the whole idea is we're going to kind of look back at kind of the Lokad journey so far and sort of the lessons we've kind of learned along the way. So perhaps if we start off by maybe casting your mind back to sort of 2008 when you first sort of started the company. Why did you decide to start a company within the supply chain industry? What was it that so interested you?
At the time, I was a PhD student. I never completed my PhD, by the way, disclaimer, in computational biology, but frankly, the amount of, I would say, of intelligence of I would say, the number of excellent researchers in the fields was astonishing. So it was humbling. It was very enthusiastic, I would say. But for, I would say, for a PhD candidate, I could see that basically the world would just be fine without me. The whole domain was in good care. And I started to look a bit sideways at other domains. And when I started to look at supply chain, what I saw was mostly, I would say, 19th century math. I mean, literally at the time. And so I realized that there was maybe, a potential to do things better in this area, which is absolutely gigantic, by the way. And so, well, with a lot of enthusiasm, I was launching my own company.
So how did those first couple of years kind of go then? Was it something that you found easy to kind of launch? Were people interested in what you were sort of talking about? Or was it something that there was a lot of hesitancy at first?
I know, it was terrible, downright terrible. I mean, literally, it took us years to have something that actually worked. I mean, we discussed that in one of the previous episodes, but basically, the idea is that Lokad was founded on the idea of forecasting as a service, which is actually a very, very bad idea. Technically, but more importantly, from a supply chain perspective as well. And we discussed that in the idea of naked forecasts are just plain bad. But no, I think the journey, the start of the journey was quite slow, precisely because literally it wasn't working.
Okay, let's talk about maybe then some of the big steps you took along the way. Kind of when we spoke about this, the first one you kind of mentioned was in 2011, and this idea of kind of forecasting with bias using kind of quantile forecasts. So why was this something that was a little bit controversial? Why was it different?
I mean, it wasn't controversial. It was just plain weird. In statistics, in statistic classes, and in all the supply chain circles I was aware of, the whole idea was you need to eliminate the bias. And large companies have entire teams of demand planners who are literally spending their entire days adjusting the model so that they are not biased. Why would you actually have people who do the opposite and add bias and do it on purpose, not by mistake? That was just, the point. It was not controversial. It was like dumb. Why? We have an entire team working on removing the bias, and you want to add bias? So actually it took me several years to even come to the conclusion that this might be a good idea. For me, it wasn't like a controversial position. It was not a position at all. It was a non-problem until, by elimination of all the other stuff that didn't work, I came to a conclusion that was, I think, the Quantile forecasting breakthrough that, yes, biases were very, very useful in supply chain because you want to be biased toward profit. I'm doing it short. And thus, we had to kind of completely re-engineer the technology around this idea.
Okay, and then another kind of step you took was kind of in 2012, where you decided that instead of sort of following the majority of the market, which was taking that kind of enterprise plug-and-play approach, you decided to do something very different and use kind of more of a programmatic approach. So why was that something that you thought was good for supply chains?
Again, Lokad was started with, I would say, enterpriseware, the very classic way. You have screens, you have buttons, you have menus, you have options, just the sort of things you expect from any kind of enterprise app. But the reality is, every single time we were signing a new client, we realized that there was so many things that didn't fit. So literally, we were, rolling out tons of new features to accommodate these clients. And usually, you think when you start a software company that yes, we don't have all the features that the market wants, but we are going to add a few more features, and we will gradually converge to something that is feature complete. And so yes, it's okay to start with an MVP, minimum viable product, and you rinse and repeat, add a few features, and hopefully you convert to something that is good and that has a market fit. But I was like literally 4 years down the road, and I didn't see any convergence. It was, if I saw anything, it was like divergence. We were starting to manage to win larger clients at the time. And I was saying that it was even more diverse than what I had during the first few years when I was dealing only with SMBs. So if anything, I was not on a convergent path, I was on a divergent path. And if I looked at my competitors, I saw monsters. Monsters not in the sense of their software product are the monsters, not the people. People are just fine. But the software products were like monsters that had like thousands of screens, literally thousands of options, and literally it was like a completely divergent development process. And I thought, and at the time the challenge was, am I going to follow this path? Does it even make sense? Is there any way to have some kind of convergence? And then I finally came to the conclusion that supply chains were way too diverse to basically fit into a rigid app with menus and buttons. Instead, we needed like a programmatic approach where the menus, buttons, and calculation would be completely bespoke, and thus you need to program them for every client. But if you program stuff for every client, then what is your problem? Your problem becomes productivity and reliability. You want to be able to do it super fast, super cheap, and thus envision a platform for programmatic optimization, predictive optimization of supply chain was born.
Okay, it's kind of very normal for a company to kind of evolve and slightly change their path. But we always kind of say like hindsight is a really fine thing. So did you ever look back at those kind of early years, and are there any sort of big mistakes that you kind of made and any sort of big regrets that you have?
I mean, obviously, the path of an entrepreneur is full of regrets in the sense that if I knew at the time back in 2008 what I know presently, probably we would have taken three times less time. We would have been 3 times faster to the market than what we have been. But it's difficult to replace, even intellectually to replace the past. For example, when I started in 2008, I started with the tech of the time, and then 1 year down the road, there was in 2009, it became very clear that, for example, the world of software has changed completely, and that we had to move toward cloud computing. So cloud computing, until then, the problem of the biggest mistakes that you do is that usually it's not a mistake until the point it becomes self-evident that the way you were looking at the problem was completely wrong. So you see, it's not that you were wrong, it's that usually you redefine the very problem that you're trying to solve. For example, what is the big deal with cloud computing? The big deal is that the classical perspective of looking at, let's say, a computer problem, that's how I started back in 2008, is you have a machine, a computer, to do a calculation, a data crunching task that you want to execute. So how long will it take? Well, it takes as long as the program is running. You have one machine, you launch the program, and when it's done, it's done. So what is constant is the machine. The problem varies, and thus the computational time it takes to complete the resolution of the problem varies. The cloud computing mindset is the complete opposite. Is you have what is constant is your target delivery time for the result of your calculation. So you say, I want my calculation to be delivered in 30 minutes. And then I can dynamically adjust the amount of computing resource I allocate to solve the problem. If I need 1,000 CPU to basically deliver the result in 30 minutes, so be it. Let's dynamically allocate those 1,000 CPUs. And by the way, in 2010, Lokad becomes the first company to be charged by the minute by Microsoft for on Azure. But the key insight was when we shifted from this idea of one side was the hardware is a constant, and so what varies is the problem, and thus the delay to deliver the solution to the problem, versus the cloud computing perspective where the constant is the delay, and then you adjust the computing resources to deliver within the time frame. Suddenly we had to rewrite almost entirely everything that we had done at Lokad.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's quite interesting about kind of what we've done. If you kind of look back, you can see we've gradually evolved as kind of technologies kind of evolved with us. If you look on our website, you can kind of see those generations of machine learning we kind of followed. What would you say was the biggest breakthrough from a technical perspective?
But that's the thing, is that it's not evolution. It was literally complete rewrite. People think, oh, it's just an evolution. No, I mean, it didn't work like that through the history of Lokad. It was more like we had a product, we throw it away, restarted from scratch, usually on a better problem. So you see, it's not just it's a better product because it has like the same features, just better. Usually it's literally a different problem because it tackles the problem with a better understanding. So it usually completely changed, the technology or the architecture of the software and everything. I think probably in terms of machine learning, the biggest breakthrough was, there are different things. From the infrastructure perspective, the biggest breakthrough was cloud computing. Again, that's the idea that you want to have like hard deadline on to deliver your results, and the rest varies. But from a statistical perspective, the biggest breakthrough was actually probably deep learning, even if it's not what we have right now in production. It's differentiable programming, but the spark, the breakthrough itself, was coming from deep learning. And then I would say from a supply chain perspective, the biggest breakthrough was the idea that you need to take a completely, I would say, financial perspective on the supply chain end-to-end, where basically you put dollars of error and reward and opportunities everywhere. This financial mindset was probably the biggest breakthrough to look at everything through the lenses of a financial analysis, instead of looking at it from the lenses, I would say, of service level with percentages of error that you're trying to improve.
Okay, and another maybe slightly odd kind of route that many would have looked at and sort of seen as a bit bizarre was back in 2016, back when I sort of first started, was when we kind of dipped our toe in kind of the world of Bitcoin R&D. Why did we kind of take that route, and also what did you kind of learn from those experiences?
I mean, in Bitcoin has always been a hobby for me. So professionally, Lokad doesn't really depend on any kind of crypto, blockchain, or Bitcoin. Nevertheless, it is fascinating because it's literally, I would say, economics in action, where people have started to engineer software systems around, I would say, ideas grounded in our understanding of economics. And that's very interesting, because usually those sort of ideas, they only belong to the realm of politics, and those ideas are never engineered. You can have a politician that say we need to raise the taxation. They have another politician that say we need to lower the taxation. You have etc. And the experience only takes place on the scale of countries, and usually, I mean, they are not engineered. They are just what they are. The result of an imperfect democratic process at best. And the interesting things about Bitcoin, it was literally microeconomics in action from an engineering perspective, and where you can actually assess whether it actually works or not. And that's very interesting, because actually supply chains are pretty much the same. It's microeconomics in action, and you can actually, to a certain extent, experiment and assess whether things are working or not. So from this perspective, I found it very, very interesting. And Bitcoin share many property of that supply chain have. It's distributed, many actors, layers of software, tons of complexity, conflicting incentives, problems that are multi-layered security problems. You know, there is, I mean, obviously it's all analogies, not direct translation, but there is a lot of inspiration to be found in looking at, I would say, at the technical insights found in those communities. Not the speculation, that's just noise, but the technical insights, they are fairly interesting.
Okay, and now we've kind of grown to the company we are kind of today, just around 50 people located in the center of Paris. The thing we're very kind of adamant about is that we provide what we call a supply chain science practice. Why did you decide to move away from that more kind of data science kind of side of things?
Well, I think it's very kind of you to say that I decided to move away. It was just that it was more like we tried the classical data scientist route, failed badly, and we had to move away from this. So it was not, I would say, as prescient as it sounded. Literally, I think it was literally back when you arrived, you know, a few years ago. The problem with the data scientist perspective is you hire young engineers, and right from the hiring interviews, you define, you know, for the job position, they are applying for a job, and you set, you know, the landscape of what are they loyal to, instead of what is your commitment. Are you committed to the vision, a type of problem, a type of skills, you know, what is your commitment? And when you go down the path of data science, people are, as the title suggests, you know, committed to data problems. And this is the wrong sort of commitments. You end up with people who focus on I would say on the cool problems, you know, and the cool tools, and they want and they focus on the nice, I would say on the nice, coolish problems data-wise, while unfortunately I would say most of what it takes to actually solve a supply chain problem is pretty much in the uncool area, at least as far data processing is concerned. You need to prepare the data, where you need to qualify literally hundreds of fields. You need to document them. You need to discuss with tons of people to clarify what is the supply chain processes exactly, so that you have a chance to do something like an optimization that makes sense in practice. And thus, your commitment should not be to the data, it should be to the supply chain. And that's what we learn a bit the hard way, and that's why what we have right now is supply chain scientists, because when we hire those young, enthusiast, you know, engineers, we tell them, your commitment is not in having, you know, in delivering a fancy, you know, machine learning model. This is not what Lokad is about. Your commitment will be to make the supply chain of our clients better. And that's a very different thing. And frankly, we don't really care that much, you know, if you do it one way or another. Obviously, we have recipes that we know to work. We have certain classes of tools that have been battle tested. But fundamentally, you know, you will do whatever it takes with the client to make their supply chain better, and that should be your commitment. That should be, you know, your daily challenge, your daily inspiration, and everything. And it turned out that when we were hiring for, I would say, data scientists, we were getting people that were, I would say, that had probably too much interest in the fancy data problems, and not enough interest in, I would say, in the people, in the business problems, in making sure that there was nothing that would actually, you know, nothing that would actually get in the way of the solution to be used in production. Because usually the problems of those, I would say, machine learning driven initiatives is that they fail not because the algorithm has a problem, but just because there are bigger defects in the overall setup.
Okay, before we kind of dive into maybe some of our viewers' questions, as a final kind of question, we were a company that's very much kind of grown organically over the last decade and a bit more, and sort of slowly but surely. Kind of what are your kind of ideas for the next 5 years, the next 10 years? What do you see for Lokad for the future?
More organic growth. I mean, literally, 1 year we had 60% growth, and frankly, we were that far from complete collapse. What people don't really realize is that when they see, startups that say, oh, we have this 200% yearly growth, it's absolutely fantastic. I would say, yes, it's good if you have something where you can move fast and break things. If you have like a dating app and you have complete server meltdown, frankly, no big deal. Your customer base will come back, tomorrow. It's not a problem. When you have like a complete meltdown of something that is driving a supply chain and that suddenly your clients start to pass massive production orders or purchase orders that turns out to be complete nonsense, we are talking of multi-million-dollar mistakes. So it's very, very bad. The idea of move fast and break things, it's not completely compatible with supply chains. And what few people realize is that, I would say, looking at the job market as it exists nowadays in Paris, or same thing would be in New York, or in other big cities around the world, is that if you have like 50% growth yearly, and that you have a regular employee turnover at something like 4 years, you end up with a median age of your employee in your company that is 6 months. You see, that means that if you have 50% growth at the end of the year, your company, half of the people have only been there for 6 months. And literally, if you expect that people with only 6 months worth of experience are able to drive supply chains where we are talking of potentially hundreds of millions of euros annually, that's a lot to ask. Even if you're hiring smart, dedicated, brilliant engineers, it's a lot. And so I believe they are like, unfortunately for Lokad, we are not like a business like Facebook. Growing at 1,000% a year is just not a reasonable option, and that's why we are growing fast. But there are limits in what can be done. Otherwise, we can't even train the new people that we are constantly hiring.
Okay, well, sort of dive into a few of the questions, because I can see there's already a fair few and a few sort of familiar faces there, friends of the show. First off is one that I think a lot of the staff here at Lokad were really interested in, and we never got told. And it comes from Dervesh, who basically sort of says that, is there any special reason for the name Lokad? Is it an abbreviated form of the algorithms we're using? Is it a secret?
So the reality is, when I was doing my PhD in computational biology, I was thinking at some point about doing a business where I would use digital display for advertising. So I thought of this business, and that would be like local advertising. And I thought of local ad, so Lokad. And then it was a very good domain name, 5 letters. I kept it. And then I think 10 years later, an IBM consultant told me, oh, Lokad, obviously it's looking ahead. What a great name. And I thought, yeah, looking ahead. That's a cool story. And that's the one I will tell to my clients now. So, the real story was it was for local advertising, but I think this interpretation, I forget the name of this IBM consultant, of looking ahead is way cooler.
Okay. We've got another question here from DEH. It's a bit miserable, but it's all focused on mistakes. What was the biggest kind of defeat or setback that we've had in the history of Lokad so far? And let's particularly kind of frame it maybe from a client's perspective.
The biggest setback was I think, probably year 3 with some large US clients that we had, because, during the first few years, I didn't have big setbacks because I didn't have big clients. So it took time to actually achieve the big setbacks, and the big setbacks was actually, it was a turn point. I think it was 2011, 2012, where we were literally winning benchmarks, just like the Kaggle competition with Walmart, same style. It was just a decade before, where we had, more accuracy. It was classic forecast, so classic, weekly forecast, monthly forecast, etc. We were winning the benchmark. We were putting those things in production, and the supply chain of our clients would get worse. And then we would redo the benchmark and compare, and Lokad would have better accuracy. But then at some point, the client would literally have a phone call and tell me, Johannes, you know what, you've completely disrupted. And I remember that a meeting that I had in New York, where literally there was like, they had actually asked me to come, and I went into a room, and there was like 20 planners, and they were literally, half of them were completely furious and tell us, you know, your software is making our life completely miserable. And for me, it was such a nightmare. There was 20 people, they were really adamant. And I was thinking, yes, but in terms of accuracy, you know, we're better. And people say, frankly, we don't care. You know, you're not dealing with a mess. We are dealing with a mess. And it's just not working. It's a nightmare. And literally, people were doing overtime. They were, what a point. And the clients, I mean, they were committed. I mean, they tried. They did their best. We did their best. And I think we lost them something like 3 years down the road, but it was like such a miserable experience. Miserable and whatever.
Okay, we'll try and cheer up a little bit and talk about another not so cheerful topic, unfortunately, is coronavirus. We can't seem to avoid it at the minute. But we're sort of asking here a message from SV saying, do you think coronavirus has highlighted a need to kind of transform those traditional supply chain models?
I believe that, you know, coronavirus is just one more, you know, source of viability. You know, there are so many things that can shake the world. You know, you can have the next president decide to establish tariff. You can have a country like England that decide to exit, you know, the union. Whatever. We don't talk about that. Or I mean, there are so many things. And for example, you know, your company can be completely disrupted by tons of things. I mean, especially nowadays where sometimes you have idiotic employees that are going to post a racist video on YouTube or good moves that completely damage the brand overnight. And then you have like, you lose 20% of your market share just because there is this stupid videos that becomes viral. I mean, there are tons of things that just, you know, makes the world a bit more uncertain. So I think if it outlines one thing, it's something that we have been a bit advocating for a lot of years, is you should plan for uncertainty. I think that's, I have no clue whatsoever what the future will be with, you know, the post-COVID world. I'm pretty sure it will be even more erratic than before. And so you need to embrace uncertainty, embrace risk, and manage it. Instead of doing a forecast and pretend that you know the future with your crystal ball. Lokad doesn't have a crystal ball, neither do you. So you need to basically embrace uncertainty and manage risk. I believe that nowadays it's a sort of ideas that is starting to make their way through finance. Not every hedge fund is aligned with those sort of ideas. But the best are getting online with that, and I suspect in terms of supply chain, again, the companies that are getting ahead with this crisis are the people like Amazon that precisely, you know, emphasize resilience, capacity to embrace uncertainty and react super swiftly with a lot of, I would say, of digital systems to support that.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to stick with the coronavirus theme just for one more question from Marcus Leopoldse, friend of Lokad's, who's just asking how
the worldwide director of knowledge supply chain McKinsey. I'm honored. I'm honored.
Okay, he's asking, well, how well did the Lokad algorithms actually do during the COVID disruption? Did the customer have to go back to kind of the manual, or did the Lokad algorithms cope with it automatically?
So the algorithms are not magic. The algorithms themselves fared terribly. But, and that's a big but, is that Lokad, what we're selling, is not just a software platform. We always say nowadays it's what we call managed plans. It's basically have the platform, have a team of supply chain scientists. And literally, the team of supply chain scientists were working overtime to first shut down in March pretty much all our European supply chains, then 1 month later shut down all our US supply chains, and then 2-3 months down the road to restart them, you know, with them. And it's the sort of things where it's not just a matter of algorithm, it's literally, that's precisely a situation where you need to have like programmatic expressiveness, because there was several challenges. I mean, first you had to, you know, have, you know, to organize the shutdown, to organize the restart, and then you had to tweak the model so that this super bizarre lockdown period would not be interpreted as a drop of demand. You know, you cannot have like 3 months where you're going to count that as demand, and that's going to garbage completely all your seasonal profiles. So I think the crux of that is that, and where our technology has been quite efficient, is that it shined not because the algorithms were powerful, but because supply chain scientists were enable, I would say, a very high level of productivity. So they could, because literally when the shit hits the fan, literally, you don't have weeks to prepare for the transition. It's literally, we receive phone calls saying, Lokad, you know what, next week we are shutting down our plants, we are shutting down our warehouses, we need to prioritize stuff that needs to be done before that time. You know what, you have 24 hours to adapt the model so that those things will go on, will be executed gracefully. Start working. And literally every hour counts. And the supply chain scientists, even if pretty much the entire company worked overtime, we literally had to execute that within a few days. So the crux was not the quality of the algorithm, but the productivity that Envision grants for, I would say, for explicit modeling of the supply chains.
Okay, we're going to sort of go back to kind of the discussions with cryptocurrencies and kind of Bitcoin. This is a message from John Michel, who sort of was asking, do you see any real kind of value added from those blockchain applications and Bitcoin in the supply chain in kind of the near term, so over the next sort of 3 years or so, or do you just see it as crypto kind of hype?
I see a lot of value, but just not the kind of value you would expect. First, it redefines, literally those cryptos, they redefine what computer security means. Because the interesting thing is that if you put a Bitcoin on a computer, you can literally, you know that the computer is safe because the Bitcoin doesn't get stolen. And that's incredibly interesting. That means that suddenly, you have like a very simple test to see if your systems are safe or not. You can drop some cryptocurrency on it, and if it evaporates, well, guess what? There is somebody lurking around in your systems. And people, that's insane, but people started to realize when they started, Bitcoin businesses, they started to have like machines on the cloud, anywhere, having, sizable portion of cryptos hold online, and they all went bankrupt through theft. And literally, people realized that nothing was safe. All the cloud computing providers had exploits. All the IoT devices have exploits. All the smartphones have exploits. I mean, literally, people realized that the extent of the problem, the magnitude of the problem. So I believe that as supply chain, we have the problem, I would say, twice as worse, because supply chains are by design, they are geographically distributed. You cannot, have like a fortress approach to IT security just because, you have stuff pretty much spread all over the world. So it's a massive challenge, and where what is happening in crypto is very interesting because it gives you insights on all the things that you have to do to secure your system for real. And that's, for me, that's the main added value. So again, I would not suggest that as an investment vehicle. I suggest to have a look at the technicalities of those things, and especially from an IT security perspective that typically combine social engineering problem with software exploit problems.
Okay, got another message here from another one of our friends, Khalil Mehana, who sort of mentions forecasting, no matter how good it is, it needs information for kind of the users behind it. Two key users are going to be kind of the project leader from the company side and the supply chain scientist from kind of the Lokad side. So how important is that professionalism and business understanding from those two people, and how much can that impact upon kind of the result and the accuracy of the final forecasts?
That's the trick, is that we have, about 100, a bit more than 100 companies in production. We are not tweaking the forecast. This is not how it's done. People think of, oh, you need to have like human insight to shift the forecast. No, it's typically to frame how you are even going to extract statistical information from the data. So you see, you're not trying to guess the market by having your human insight and stuff. I mean, that happens. We have some fringe situations. For example, one that come to my mind, the A380, the aircraft from Airbus. We have some clients that are serving parts of this aircraft. When basically Airbus announced that they are discontinuing this type of aircraft, yes, you can adjust, with market knowledge, the forecast. But it's very rare. It's very rare, those sort of situation. Usually, the work of, I would say, the supply chain practitioners and the supply chain scientists at Lokad, they are a lot more, it's typically about first framing the problem so that the algorithms are learning, and optimizing the right thing, which is a moving target if the situation evolves with COVID. It's not about, injecting, knowledge in the sense that you tweak the forecast. Is literally you're reframing the very problem that you're trying what you're trying to forecast and what you're trying to optimize. And then it's usually, most of the mundane work is about revisiting the economic drivers. We are optimizing those dollars of error, but those dollars of error, it's not something that you extract from the data. There is no, data mining or machine learning algorithm to know whether a stock out is going to be, bad or really bad for your clients. You don't know. You have to ask your clients, and you have to assess, and have like a strategic opinion on what should be, for example, what we call in the local jargon the stock out penalty. But that's something that is not in the data. So the basic, I would say, day-to-day operation is much more on, the problem, how it's framed, what is the strategy, do we even have an algorithm or a numerical recipe that is even solving the right problem? That's what we're working about. The daily work is not about tweaking the forecast. We almost don't do that.
Okay, got another question here from probably one of our top viewers of the show, Gokul Pankaj, who says, can you give kind of your take on the challenges that are involved in implementing kind of those narrow AI solutions for business forecasting? And is this something Lokad is very much au fait with? And is kind of data quality something that really kind of restricts what you can do in that?
So first, AI is a keyword that demonstrates that people have no clue whatsoever what they're doing.
No offense.
So whenever you have a company that say we have an AI solution, you need to think, okay, those people have no clue whatsoever. Because literally, Lokad doesn't have an AI solutions. We had various classes of machine learning algorithms ranging from clustering, kernel methods, support vector machines, Bayesian networks, deep learning, and now differentiable programming, etc., etc., etc. So it's literally classes of algorithms. So those class of algorithms, they have pros and cons. I'm not going to go into the detail. But bottom line, one takeaway is if the vendor has AI on their slide, just discard. You will be doing your company a favor. Then, in terms of data, usually the problem is that there is no bad data. Data in supply chain, I believe for the last 3 decades, now that basically supply chains operate on barcodes or RFIDs, the amount of erroneous data entries are super small. If you have like 0.1% bad data, really in the sense of really you have like garbage numbers, garbage values, it's the max of what we observe. So usually it's, the amount of data that is really bad in the sense corrupt is almost statistically insignificant, and usually it's fairly easy. You have some dumb mistakes, such as, for example, the quantity and the barcode that's been swapped out. But if you have the question of, has this client ordered 12 units of this pack, or is it like 70 bazillion unit of the pack number 12? Yeah, well, it's the other way around. So it's fairly easy. Now, the problem with data is usually it's very poorly qualified. And you have an ERP. The ERP may have something, like 5,000 tables, hundreds of fields in every table, and you end up with garbage in, garbage out just because nobody paid enough time to qualify what the data was about. So you end up with garbage in, garbage out, not because the data is bad, just because it's unqualified from a semantic perspective.
Okay, got another question here that's quite interesting from kind of a global supply chain kind of perspective. Obviously, over the last sort of 30, 40 years, globalization has been huge. But they're asking, well, do you think that global supply chain can really last? With things like climate change, does it still make sense to wear those T-shirts that are produced in Asia if you're in Europe?
People, underestimate a few forces. First, they underestimate how the strength of specialization for countries. For example, there are only 3 countries in the world that have RAM factories, random access memories. So literally, if you want, and those components, RAMs, are used in every single computer on Earth. So if you want RAM, and all the computers use them, there are only 3 countries. It's South Korea, China, United States. Anywhere else, well, tough luck. And then if you want, let's say, lithium for your batteries, for your smartphone, well, it turned out that the world reserves of lithium are just 3 countries. It's Chile, Argentina, and Australia, I think. Some people will double check. So again, I would say if you want to have like a local production of lithium, well, tough luck. And the reality, and same thing for, I think, if you want to have like watches, I believe that for master watchmaking, so nice, luxury watchmaking, I think it's, I know that Switzerland is more than half, but I think on the master watchmaking segment, they're like 70%. So again, I don't think it's always feasible. For T-shirts, I think that's a sort of, I would say, low value items that if we, as textile has been an industry where that has been traditionally super lagging behind because it's so hard to automate. As a result, textile production moved to China, but now it's not in China anymore. It has moved to cheaper countries like Vietnam or Philippines or Bangladesh. But the thing is, once we are in Bangladesh and the salary hopefully will raise in Bangladesh, where will those things move? There is not in Africa, maybe, I don't know. But we are running out of cheap countries. So, and the automation is progressing. So I believe that for those basic supply chains, they will probably be brought locally. Unfortunately, don't expect that it will produce jobs because they will be brought back to, I would say, the places where those things are consumed once a super high degree of automation is achieved. So, and will we have, I would say, marginally more local supply chains? Yes, I kind of believe so. Again, because when you have things that are like incredibly automated, it doesn't really matter anymore where you position your factories. It does matter. Again, lithium is only in a few places in the world, etc., etc. But suddenly, when basically you don't care about the cost of local manpower, you can put your production pretty much where you want.
Okay, got 2 kind of questions here that I'm going to kind of join together into one big one. One from Kenya, one from Manmeet. Kenya was kind of asking, because the quantitative supply chain approach is so different, do you kind of encounter a lot of skepticism by implementing those kind of practices? And Manmeet kind of builds on that as well, and he's sort of asking, well, what kind of organizational kind of change management challenges do you kind of encounter when you're kind of implementing something like Lokad?
That's probably one of my biggest frustration, is that I don't encounter that much skepticism. And I tell you why. Because when I tell people you need, for example, time series forecast, naked time series forecast is completely broken. It ignores uncertainty. People, they know that. And then I tell them, you know what, if you forecast a product, but you don't know that you're going to introduce 10 more products that compete with these products, you're going to have like cannibalization all over the place. And if you have your time series model, it's just going to completely ignore those cannibalization. And so it's completely broken. And again, people are not idiots. They know that. So the frustration is they get it. So I think we typically, when I'm talking with, let's say, supply chain directors, head of planning, head of supply chain forecasting, and this sort of thing, they are not skeptical. They say, yes, yeah, I understand. My frustration comes from, but you know what? I'm just not going to do it. I know it's broken, but am I willing to really, in theory, a lot of people say, if you ask them the question, yes, I'm going to do what's best for my company. But unfortunately, in large companies, people mostly do whatever, just what it takes so that they can keep their job. And even if they are fairly high in the management ranks, you would pretend that most people are heroes that promotes innovation and whatnot. But no, most people have very interesting hobbies, interesting life, and their job is, well, just a job, and they are not going to go into a crusade to reform their organization so that it can, perform better. Yes, for the shareholders, it's better. It would grow the company. It would make it more profitable. But let's face it, most people that are in large organizations, they have a salary. They don't want to harm the organization. They want to be reasonably good at their job, but they're not going to get into a crusade to kind of, bring their company to the next stage. And if the company goes badly, they will change job and go to the next company. That's it.
Okay, we'll just kind of squeeze in another couple of questions before we finish up. I'm going to squeeze in this one from Richard Lubianski, mainly because he's staying up late in his time zone. So very much appreciated.
Australia, heroes.
Yeah. So he's asking, well, in which area can the Lokad approach unlock the most business value where others maybe cannot?
Where it's the most messy. And usually the performance and the value that Lokad brings is usually inversely proportional to the amount of mess and complication. And when people tell, it's like a nightmare, it's very good. Because usually when the supply chain is like a nightmare with way too many options, way too many decisions, way too many, things with second order effect, with multi-echelon, with shelf life, with retrofits, all sorts of super bizarre, effects. That's typically where Lokad shines the most, because usually it's a sort of supply chain where optimization hasn't even started yet. So, because obviously if you have a supply chain that is already extremely lean, because it's so simple, and probably I would say let's say, for example, water distribution, there is nothing, dumber than water distribution, so the supply chain of water, nobody talks about it because it's so damn, bland that there is nothing left to optimize. Everything that was left to optimize was almost optimized, a century ago. So Lokad cannot do anything, almost, I would say, for water companies. But if you go on the most extreme other side, I would say, let's say aerospace, which is a complete mess, in complete disarray, especially with COVID, that's typically sort of areas where we perform the best. But fresh food can be super complicated. Luxury also tend to be super complicated, and there is the additional problem that you have very limited data sets. So the classical statistical methods falls apart. Typically, those sort of situations are also, that's a bit of a paradox. You would say, Lokad perform best when there is tons of data. Yes, in a sense, but also when there is very limited data, and so all the usual statistics just don't work. That's also a very nice sweet spot for us.
Okay. Seems there's been a bit of a discussion with Nicholas van der Poot, one of our previous favourite guests on the show. He's been discussing with EDIP, and kind of the main question was, well, what was kind of the biggest problem that motivated taking on a huge task like a complete rewrite?
You mean a rewrite of the software of Lokad?
Yeah.
Yes. First, if you see that something is not working, that you're on the wrong path, usually the rewrite is just the last resort, is when you don't have even hope anymore. So it's literally at some point, you do incremental development and then more incremental development, and then at some point you just run out of hope that it will ever work. And so at some point you just rewrite it from scratch. It's very tough. It's not something that we took lightly. Every time, there is a saying in software that you should never rewrite from scratch. I would say, yes, it's usually a very bad thing to rewrite from scratch. But when you realize that you have architectural flows, design flows that are completely at the core of your architecture, you're toast. You're literally toast. And that's something that that's also I tell most of our clients, is most of the good properties of, good or bad properties of a piece of software are by design. It's literally the very key design decision that were made probably during the first 3 months of the development stage of this software that are driving everything else from that point on. So when you see that there were some key design assumption that just falls apart, you're kind of screwed.
Okay. Got a question here that might be quite entertaining from Slim Kalel. He asks, how well does Lokad work alongside S&OP type solutions?
We just ignore them. The funny thing is that bureaucracies tend to completely have an incredible properties. they systematically outlive their usefulness. So you end up with situations where Lokad is live in a production. We are literally the supply chain scientists dealing with a modest team of supply chain practitioners are driving every single decisions, literally. So all the buy, all the production, all the inventory movements, even the prices. And then you have the S&OP bureaucracy that where people are still meeting, people are still doing, still have their process. They still ask the salespeople their forecast. Spreadsheets are still, filled of numbers. People still practice their usual sandbagging shenanigans and whatnot. So this whole bureaucracy keeps living. It's completely detached from, the reality, so it doesn't strictly hurt. So, because it has zero effect on the real world, which is physical, I would say, effect on the supply chain. But, people are under the impression that there are only like governments that can maintain, useless administration, just like, for example, the UK that managed to have like a department of the colonies way until, the UK ceased to have any colony to manage. They were still like a gigantic ministry. France has done pretty much the same with, for example, we still have the Banque de France, which is to manage the franc. We don't have the franc anymore. This is the euro, but we still have the Banque de France. So bottom line, it's not because you're a company that you're immune to the problem. It's the same problem for any large kind of company. And so we end up with those very, I would say, this paradoxical situation where usually Lokad operates side by side with S&OP that is still doing their thing, just completely detached. And where it becomes even weirder is that when we operate side by side with the data science team. Because there is a data science team that is still doing, producing models that are not used. They still produce prototypes, usually 1 or 2 per quarter, which are completely detached. And we just go on with their lives being in production. It's weird, but you know what? It's the way it is.
Okay. We'll start sort of wrapping things up now. I'll sort of finish with maybe a comment rather than a question from Yatin Dinesh, who I know is a big fan of the show as well. He sort of just says, loving the podcast so far, years of experience and learnings through mistakes being shared. But he wants to know, who is it that writes the blog?
Who is the
blog?
The blog? It's usually me. It's usually me.
He's very busy.
Yes, and by the way, if you look at the rhythm for blog production, since we started this show, I have been producing, I would say, at a much slower rate, the blog post. I will get back to, I'm planning to get back to the blog, but there is only so many hours a day, but I really want to get more time to write the blog. But no, I never delegated to some kind of third-party content agency to just have like a mass-produced happy talk, that just give you like platitudes and nonsense combined.
Okay, it's always me who normally kind of gets in the way of things.
No, not at all.
To kind of wrap things up today and to kind of conclude, why did you think it was important to kind of look back at the Lokad journey, and what is it you kind of hope our viewers kind of learn from today's episode?
I mean, the thing is, it's very difficult intellectually to realize that you're wrong. It's very, very hard. I mean, first, it's not super agreeable, to realize that you've done tons of mistakes. So usually your basic, instinct is to a defensive mechanism. So you find excuses. And you say, yeah, we didn't succeed, but the clients, there was such a culture shock. It was such a tough situation. They had an ERP deployment in progress that complicated. There is always tons of excuses. There is this motto you can have. You have either results or excuses. And there is a third way, which is to understand why it went wrong. And where it's very important to me is that I'm probably doing tons of mistakes right now. I just don't know which ones. So to revisit, your past mistakes is a way to think of what can possibly go wrong right now. I mean, obviously we are doing things that are way better than what we were doing 10 years ago, but it doesn't mean we are perfect. I'm pretty sure that there are tons of things when 10 years from now I will realize, frankly, I was just out of my mind or something. It was just obvious that there was like a better way to do it. and it was, you know, the elephant in the room. It was like fat and obvious, and yet we were just around that. So yes, so that's in my mind. Revisiting those things is something that I try to do repetitively, because it gives you an angle to realize what is wrong in what you're doing right now. And usually, again, the problem doesn't lie in the fact that you could do something better. That's the wrong way to look at the problem, because usually the problem is that you're not even looking at the problem from the right way. So it's not about looking the problem better, doing it better, because that's completely, I would say, a linear progression from what you have, like an incremental progression. Usually the biggest, you know, breakthrough happen when you see, I should have looked at this problem from a different angle, and then you realize, no, there is another problem, another angle that is really worth fighting for. And it's not that we could do better, it's that we were not even addressing the problem at all in the past.
Okay, we'll have to wrap it there, but after 100 episodes, we've probably earned a beer, I reckon now. So that's everything for this week. If we didn't answer your question, make sure you drop us an email at contact@lokad.com and we'll try and get back to you. Make sure you click on the subscribe button, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Thanks for watching.